Police officers of Reddit, who's the smartest criminal you've ever encountered? Most of them are really stupid, so this guy isn't a criminal mastermind, but here goes. He wanted to rob a jeweler's on our city's main street. So he found out the flat beside the jeweler's was empty, and he hid there. For 2 weeks straight, he triggered the alarm on purpose several times a night. Massive headache for the police and business. We turned up to see nothing there, nothing on cameras, thought it was just a fluke, so the jewelers turned off the alarm system and said they'd wait until the morning to get a new one installed. Or that one rewired because something wasn't right. As soon as he heard the police leaving, he tore down the wall. He'd already been working on this apparently, and robbed the place, taking his sweet time. Escaped without anyone noticing anything for hours, until the jewelers came back in the morning. Then he tried to resell some stuff he sold, which had a serial number on it, and got caught. So not that smart after all. Good effort though. Yeah, whenever it comes to stealing a lot of extremely valuable stuff, how do you ever expect to sell it? First of all, your market's gonna be tiny, and second of all, everyone who's in that market is gonna know that these are stolen and are going to be looked for. So in some ways, stolen jewelry isn't worth a whole lot of anything. A friend of my brother moved to Israel, where for a period of time, it was acceptable to drive with an American's driver's license. He was pulled over for speeding, and when asked for his license, gave the officer his Costco card. Costco is a membership-based retail warehouse in the US and a few other countries. The exchange apparently went something like this. The officer said, "Costco? What's Costco?" He said, "It's the state I'm from." "That sounds made up." He said, "No, there's lots of states you probably haven't heard of. Have you heard of Arkansas? How about Idaho?" He says, "Well, I guess not." "Well, I'm from the small state of Costco." The officer didn't have a response and wound up writing the ticket to someone with a Costco driver's license. Friend framed the ticket and still has it hanging on his wall. Well dang, to get this one worked out, you're gonna have to go through Costco court. Well, there was this one guy. We'll call him Jack. Now, Jack stole stuff, but also involved a lot of people. One time, he was planning to steal a whole bunch of cars. All luxury cars. So what he did was he got his people to call 911 from all different places, all countries, to tell them that car theft was taking place in multiple places. Oh, he also only used a few people each time, so it was different voices, people, locations. So the police went each time, until he actually did the crime. Then no one came. He was never caught. When the owner of those cars came, the police didn't believe him. 10 out of 10 genius right there. Yeah, I've always thought that if you wanted to commit a crime, it would be so much easier if you had so many different people. Because imagine you and 100 other people decide to all commit a crime at the exact same time, but in completely different places all over the city. There's just not enough police resources to go after everybody. So not only did you get away with it, but you also got away with so many more crimes too. The story goes like this. A homeowner walks out one morning to drive to work, only to find his car missing. He reports the car stolen to police. A few days later, his car is sitting back in front of his house. When he gets inside, he finds a note. It was an apology that said the thief was in dire need of a quick transportation, and so he borrowed the first car he found with the keys inside. The writer noticed the sticker on the car for a local sports team, and just so there were no hard feelings, he left 4 tickets to an upcoming game in the glove box for the homeowner and his family. So the homeowner and his family attend the game, but when they return home, they find the house has been ransacked and all the items of value are gone. Oh man, this one is horrible. Although it does give me ideas how much could I charge to be able to rent my car out to people for just short amounts of time? There was a guy with over 50 speeding charges, with the name Prawo Jazdi. He was in a different car, with a different disguise every single time. Eventually, after the government set up a special task force to take down this guy, they realized that Prawo Jazdi means driver's license in Polish. Clarification, it was 50 different people. The police just wrote down their name as Prawo Jazdi every time someone with a Polish driver's license was caught speeding. Well, I bet Prawo Jazdi and Pepe Silvia are out partying right now. There's a small tourist town where I grew up that is divided in half by a big river. The only way between the two sides is over a long bridge, unless you go all the way around another mountain pass. These guys called in 2 to 3 bomb threats to a posh hotel on one side of the bridge. I think they even left some dummy packages. All the police went across the bridge to do crowd control. The guys then called in a bomb threat on the bridge, and started robbing stuff on the other side. The police couldn't be positive the bomb threat was real or not, and hesitated long enough to give the thieves a head start. I mean, when you think about it, it's kind of strange that, so the police are technically your enemy when you're the criminal, but with one 911 call, you technically have the ability to tell your enemy where to go. Man, I feel like I'm encouraging some bad behavior in this video. Here's one. I knew this guy back in the early 80s. Let's call him Jim. Well, he really wanted this high-powered superbike, but he knew he couldn't ever afford it. So what he did was to take drive to London and scout it about for a few days, until he found that particular model parked outside a house. He goes back that night with a slide hammer, pulls the lock, and steals the bike. He gets it home, puts it in his garage, and completely strips it so that the only thing left is the frame and the bottom half of the engine, which he drags into the weeds at the bottom of his garden. Then he pours fuel over it and burns it a bit. A few weeks pass and weeds have started to grow over it. It's at that point that he calls the cops and reports that someone had dumped a bike frame in his garden. The cops show up and he explained that he'd just gotten back from being away and found it. The cops take the frame and note down his name and address. A few days later, the cops call him and say that the bike had been stolen from London a month or so ago, from the serial number on the bottom half of the engine and frame, and that the insurance company had classed the bike as a write-off and had told the cops to dispose of it. But now, because the frame was found in his garden and the insurance company didn't want it, the cops were duty-bound to ask him if he wanted to keep it, or if they should throw it out. So he tells them that he'd always wanted to build a bike. He gets the frame back from them, repaints it, then puts it all back together and re-registers it as a Q-reg, as in stolen and recovered. I forgot to call him Jim, didn't I? Yeah, I mean, I guess that managing to steal something, that's the easy part. But being able to legally make that your own property, that's where it gets a little more tricky. Working in a home improvement store when I was younger, this guy came in, went to the snowblowers, took one and went to the return desk. Said he wanted to return it, but had no receipt. They told him you need a receipt, so he says, okay, I'll be back, and wheels it off to his car through the front door. He did this a few times apparently. A couple places even helped him load it back into his car. Yeah, apparently this is actually kind of a big problem for a lot of stores. Like now they have to actually train their employees to watch out for this kind of thing. Obligatory, not a cop, but close on 20 years ago now, a guy on Australia's Gold Coast got away with bank robbery in broad daylight. He cased the bank for a while and discovered a pattern of the bank manager arriving about 30 minutes before anyone else each morning, where he would leave the front doors unlocked so staff could help themselves in without a key, or needing to wait for the boss to come and let them in. One morning, the crook dressed himself up for a busy day of office work and waited for the bank manager to arrive. As the manager was unlocking the doors, he made his move, entering the building and threatening the manager with a gun. He got all the details he'd need to access the vault and so forth, and then tied the manager up and stuffed him in his office. When the staff arrived, he told them that the manager had called in sick and that the regional office had sent him in to do the open shop thing, and no one batted an eyelid. This bank had a small walk-in vault that normally held only about 30 to 50,000 on any given day, but the old mate had timed his robbery for the morning after business banking day, when all the local small businesses would make their end-of-week deposits, and reportedly got a score of close to $250,000. Once the vault was opened, he pulled his gun out and invited all the staff to enter the vault and locked them in. By this stage, the bank was due to be open, so when he went to leave, there were a number of customers waiting to get inside to do their banking. He told them all that they had an issue with the computers, and that the tech team had estimated it would take about 30 minutes before the issue would be resolved, and that they couldn't open until then. Then he got into his car and drove straight to the airport and flew to Hong Kong and then disappeared. To my knowledge, the cops never caught him and never managed to find the money. They knew he'd have had to leave most of it in Australia somewhere because you can only take $10,000 in cash in any currency out of the country before customs pulls you into their interview room. So the assumption was that he had taken an accomplice where he would funnel the money to him slowly over time. So there's this Mr. Beast quote that goes along the lines of, when you're making YouTube videos, rather than uploading one cheap video every single day, try to spend all the time you would have done on all those videos and put them into one really good video, and it'll do way better than all those smaller ones put together. And apparently this guy proves that that goes the same in heists as well. Why rob a whole bunch of 7-Elevens when you could just do one massive robbery, as long as you just plan it well enough? Homeless guy in my hometown figured out if he committed some act of petty theft, he'd get a night in jail, a warm place to sleep, and a hot meal. He'd show up, turn in his stolen goods, and that would be that. After a while, the police would just tell him to take back whatever he stole the next day. Quite the town character. Yeah, I mean, it is kind of a messed up and weird system, but what are you gonna do, send somebody a bill after letting them out of prison? Probably someone who committed a crime I never solved. With that being said, I had a guy use a sledgehammer to smash his way through a wall at Best Buy and steal a bunch of phones and cameras. He was smart enough to wear gloves and a face mask and not touch anything when he didn't have to. Alarms didn't go off until he exited out the back door, which the alarm company gets after a minute or two and takes them like 3 or 4 minutes to call into us, giving him a good 5 minutes head start, so he was probably a few miles away before we got dispatched to it. He clearly scoped out the area before doing his deed too. Smart dude. Yeah, it's kind of funny when you think about it, like an alarm will go off if you open a window or you open a door, but alarm technically usually won't go off if you just slam right through the wall. A guy, let's call him Dave, I worked with told this story. He was working at a Mercedes dealership, and he was sitting at a desk when this well-dressed gentleman comes in and asks if he could test drive a specific car that was parked out front. It was also a busy day. Usually they are allowed to let people test drive by themselves after they have taken some form of deposit or something. So Dave gives out the key, this guy goes on his test drive and comes back a reasonable amount of time later. He walks in and hands off the key. gets his deposit and whatever back. This was about closing time, even possibly on a Friday. Everything is in order. Fast forward to the next business day. Dave's boss walks in and realizes that one of the Mercedes out front is gone. Dave has to explain that the car was returned and that they have the key and everything. Turns out the criminal didn't test drive. He drove somewhere to create a replica of the key and gave that replica back to the desk. He kept the real key. That's smart SOB. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that this is how most people steal cars from dealerships, actually. But I mean, most of those cars all have trackers in them and everything, so they usually don't get too far. This was in the late 90s, early 2000s. A guy in my dorm came to school solely to deal drugs. He took out student loans, registered for a bunch of 300-person freshman survey courses where he would never be missed, then literally never went to class. All he did was go to raves and concerts and keggers and sell party drugs. After the first semester, he was suspended. He wrote the usual, "I was young and dumb and in over my head" sob story, and got put on probation for a semester. So he had a repeat of the fall. At the end of the year, he was kicked out and didn't care. He made something on the order of $150,000, in return for about $8,000 in student loans to cover a year of housing and tuition. So far as I know, he was never caught. It may have been short-sighted maneuver in the long run, but in the short run, it seemed fairly genius to effectively use federal loans to start your drug business. And funny enough, that guy's probably making more in his life than most of his classmates that got the degrees. At least this was like over 20 years ago, so that was probably before colleges were really gouging quite as much as they do today. Not a police officer, but I once dealt with a criminal who forged court documents facilitating his own release from prison. Okay, how did he manage that? Did he just go, oh, can I use the prison computer and the printer? Yeah, I'm not doing anything suspicious. Let me just go print something. Yeah, I need to do some homework. So there was an incident in Fargo, North Dakota, where a guy wanted to steal electronics equipment. The store had plenty of alarms on it, and generally cutting an alarm triggers an alarm, so instead he cut all the alarms. This was before cell phones were really widespread, and alarms were usually just connected to the phone line. He found an access point to one of the phone company's big trunk lines. Massive thick copper cables with tens of thousands of lines running through them. He cut through the whole thing with a circular saw, knocked out phone services of most of the town, and robbed an audio store during the ensuing chaos. There were no leads until a tip came in from another town where he'd pulled something similar. They hadn't been able to pin that to him, but had strong suspicions that he'd relocated to Fargo. So the cops pay him a visit. He refused to let them in because the cops didn't have a warrant. So the cops left to get one without leaving anyone to watch him, and he just split. When they came back, they found a saw coated in copper dust and a lot of stolen stuff. He was in the wind for a while, but even after he got caught, he had another card to play. While being transported between prisons, he'd use a key he'd made to unlock his shackles and climbed out of the roof vent of the bus. Do you ever see footage of like prisons or security systems or all this stuff in like modern days? And sometimes you think like, alright, isn't that a little bit excessive? I think a lot of that is just a result of people like this who would always just find some way to get around your security, so you just have to keep piling on more and more blockades. I worked at a jail. After getting off work, I watched an ex-inmate, a homeless guy, being released. He walked over to a patrol car, looked me in the eye, and then elbowed the window in. He was walked back to the entrance and rebooked in. It was the middle of January, and he didn't want to get too cold. Hey, I mean, if your standards are low enough, I mean, this is your free housing option. I remember getting into a festival and seeing a magician guy do tricks on the people searching him to distract them from the drugs he had on him. Spectacular show, and I'm sure he made good profit. If the police officers knew, they'd be talking about it on here, but I doubt it. Well, that's all for our smart criminals stories. I hope you learned something important. But yeah, this has been just kind of an insane week. I haven't been uploading, I've been too busy with upgrading my computer. But yeah, I've just been so busy like buying and selling and trading and returning and just like trying to figure out all these computer parts and just coming up with my ideal perfect setup. And so I wouldn't say that I was too busy to make a video, I was just too tired. But for those who actually know about computer parts, I just upgraded my 970 to a 3080 that I somehow found for $800 and then added a 4K TV to it and the standing desk. So I'm gonna have fun with it this weekend.